The Xarn had watched Earth for decades. To them, humans were irrational, divided, consumed by conflict and petty emotion. They cataloged our wars, our protests, our endless disagreements over imaginary borders and beliefs, their analysts concluded. We were too fractured to pose a threat, so when their warships finally descended, cloaked and calculated, they didn't come with fear. Oh, they came to claim. In the opening salvo, power grids collapsed, satellites fried, and major cities were plunged into darkness. Fires lit up the skies from Tokyo to Toronto. The Xarn thought fear would paralyze us. Instead, they saw something they hadn't predicted. Humans moving toward the chaos, not away. A father sprinted into a crumbling school to carry out children that weren't his. In Rio, two rival gangs dropped their guns to form a rescue line, pulling the elderly from a collapsed building. In Seoul, strangers shared oxygen masks and blood types. The Xarn intercepted human comes and expected coordinated orders. What they got was raw, improvised fury. People didn't wait for governments or militaries. They rose, together. Across languages, borders, ideologies, people stood side by side. It wasn't strategy, it wasn't logic. It was something the Xarn couldn't quantify: the emotional bond that made one human willing to die for another. Not for gain, not for glory, just because they cared. And that made us unpredictable, dangerous. From orbit, the Xarn saw resistance pop up like wildfire. Not military bases, neighborhoods, town squares, rooftops. Weapons were crude, converted. Farming drones, hacked delivery bots, even kitchen appliances turned into death traps. The Xarn had advanced tech. We had desperation, memory, love, and rage. That first night, they lost 2 cruisers over Eastern Europe, not to nukes, to humans who refused to let go of each other. The Xarn's central AI flagged Earth as emotionally volatile, high-resistance potential. Too late. A commander recorded a message before her escape pod launched. Their bonds defy reason. We underestimated the weight of their love, and now it hunts us. Across the globe, a message lit up every surviving screen. We are not broken. We are bonded. And we are coming for you. The invasion had begun, but the war had just turned. In the skies over Istanbul, the Xarn deployed suppression drones, black discs that silenced weapons and jammed thought-based tech. Civilians weren't supposed to stand a chance, but they hadn't calculated for a grandmother named Layla, who had once survived war as a child and refused to let her granddaughter face the same alone. The rusted van and a kitchen full of homemade explosives. She blocked a drone convoy long enough for an entire block to evacuate. She died in the blast. Her neighbors called her a martyr. Her name spread online like fire. Layla became a symbol, not just in Istanbul, but across continents. Makeshift banners, voice messages, spray-painted walls, her face and story galvanized. People far from the battlefield. Humanity had never moved as one species before. The Xarn gave us that gift unintentionally. In trying to crush us all at once, they unified the one thing they feared least: our hearts. Underground networks emerged overnight. Civilian hackers hijacked enemy frequencies and turned alien propaganda into rallying cries. Repurposed hologram projectors to show videos of defiance, clips of people helping, fighting, surviving. They called it the Flame. In Shanghai, street performers turned into messengers, spreading information through coded rhythms, and it's not like everything was makeshift, messy, illogical. But it worked. The Xarn were a species of precision. Every move calculated, every order obeyed. But humans, we moved with emotion, with rage, with memory. That chaos, that beautiful unpredictability, broke their algorithms. In Central Park, a violinist played to a crowd huddled beneath alien spotlights, refusing to run. In Kabul, a blind man guided children through shattered buildings by memory alone. These weren't warriors, but they became one force. Each act echoed louder than a bullet. The Xarn AI issued a status update. Planetary emotional resonance exceeding threshold. Recommend withdrawal. The request was denied. Their command still believed victory possible. He hadn't seen what we saw, humanity unchained. Not from laws or rules, from apathy, from separation. And once that broke, there was no turning back. Earth had stopped being a collection of nations. It had become a single heartbeat. It was getting louder. The Xarn were still advancing. A lie. For the first time, they began to fear the ground they walked on. 3 days into the invasion, the Xarn lost control of the skies over South America. Not to aircraft, to kites. In Colombia, a retired electrical engineer named Mateo figured out how to rig conductive wire into high-altitude kites that short-circuited the alien sensor grid. It wasn't military genius. It was desperation dressed as creativity. When those kites went up and enemy drones began to crash like burning stars, people called it the Kite Rebellion. Children joined in. So did farmers and teachers and ex-cons. The sky filled with hundreds of glittering traps, and the Xarn, who had never known true improvisation, flinched. In response, they sent in ground reclaimers, bipedal assault units designed to intimidate and vaporize. But they didn't account for how personal it had all become. Every destroyed home, every lost child, every fallen friend had planted something dark and determined in the hearts of those left behind. In Buenos Aires, an entire apartment block coordinated a counterattack using fire extinguishers, window, mirrors, and recorded baby cries to lure the reclaimers into an ambush. No one made it out alive, but the machines didn't either. And the footage, grainy and shaky, went viral across the underground network. They died standing. The caption. Read, in space, Xarn High Command debated the anomaly. The humans weren't just surviving. They were adapting. Not in centuries or years, in hours. It's a kind of evolution that shouldn't be possible. Not physically, psychologically. It wasn't just the technology they feared now. It was that unbreakable, irrational desire to protect each other, even if it meant certain death. The Xarn didn't understand sacrifice without calculation. They couldn't compute why someone would trade their life for another's without benefit. That alien logic was now a liability. Every day, more Xarn forces died to things they couldn't model. Not weapons, not traps, but people who refused to be broken, who laughed in the face of machines, who screamed names of loved ones as they attacked. One Xarn observer filed an emergency memo. Their grief is armor. Their unity is weaponized. They do not scatter. They converge. That convergence was growing. In the ruins of our cities, a new kind of force was rising, and it didn't march, burned. By the 5th day, Earth's cities had become something else. Not ruins, not tombs, hives, living, breathing resistance nests. In Chicago, a subway line long abandoned was transformed into a tactical command center run by teenagers who learned logistics from video games and disaster memes. In Mumbai, a former Bollywood stunt coordinator used his film crew to stage false attacks, drawing Xarn patrols away from supply routes. It wasn't polished, it wasn't orderly, but it was relentless. And the Xarn's greatest weapon, fear, was failing. They tried to reclaim momentum with psychological warfare. Its projections in the sky, its messages that whispered doom in every language. They underestimated how numb humanity had become to fear. We'd lived through pandemics, climate collapse, extinction clocks ticking louder each year. Fear didn't silence us anymore. It woke us up. In Prague, an AI engineer hacked a Xarn broadcast drone and replaced its terror. Message with a simple phrase in 112 languages. You have hurt what we love. We will never stop. That signal looped for 8 hours before they regained control. But by then, it had spread. Grandmothers quoted it. Children painted it on rubble. It wasn't just defiance. It was declaration. Meanwhile, the Xarn were suffering something they had never trained for. Emotional contagion. Their soldiers, grown in sterile birthing vats, began experiencing feedback loops from prolonged human contact. Some froze mid-battle. Some wept. Self-terminated. Their generals called it corruption. But it wasn't corruption. It was exposure to laughter, to music. To pain, they saw a mother clutch a lifeless son and sing to him. They saw a soldier, bleeding out, apologize to the boy next to him for not being able to hold the line longer. These moments weren't data. They were detonations. Every act of humanity cracked the Xarn programming a little more. They came to strip the Earth of resources. But it was Earth that began to strip them of control. Cana Desert outside Cairo, hey? Small resistance cell fought off an entire platoon using mirrors, fire, and echoes. The last surviving Xarn recorded a shaky transmission. We believed they were weak because they cried. We did not know tears were the signal that something unstoppable was about to rise. And it was rising fast. Far above, on the command ship orbiting the moon, the Xarn Supreme Strategist observed the chaos below with increasing dread. His models were no longer predictive. Every variable bent and broke under the pressure of human unpredictability. It studied thousands of species. None behaved like this. Victory had never felt so unstable. Meanwhile, on the ground, something terrifying was happening. Humans were learning. Not just how to fight the Xarn, how to break them, a biohacker. And Descartes discovered that the Xarn's communication pulses could be disrupted by low-frequency human singing. Gospel choirs, Mongolian throat songs, funeral dirges, they scrambled Xarn unit cohesion. Resistance cells began broadcasting songs during ambushes. The aliens reeled in confusion, paralyzed by sound waves encoded with emotion. They couldn't parse the sorrow in a funeral hymn. They couldn't decode the triumph in a child's laugh-recorded mid-evacuation. It's that emotional resonance. What they once saw as our weakness was now our most lethal weapon. In the Himalayas, monks burned incense that carried synthetic pheromones mimicking grief. Entire battalions of Xarn soldiers malfunctioned, unable to stabilize in the emotional fog. In Johannesburg, dancers painted with ash and fire moved through alleyways in hypnotic patterns, baiting drones into tight corridors. Their welders turned walls into kinetic traps, crushing the machines with precision. The Xarn couldn't adapt fast enough. Their empire was built on control, efficiency, obedience. And here was a planet that refused to obey anything but the pulse of its own heart. Even nature joined in. Birds disrupted surveillance paths. Storms grounded their skiffs. Wolves returned to cities, confusing thermal sensors. The planet was waking up, fighting with us. Or maybe, fighting through us. The Supreme Strategist issued a rare command. Prepare contingency for full withdrawal. The subordinates protested. The humans had no central leadership, no unified command. But that was the problem. Can't decapitate a species that doesn't need a head to fight. Every human, everywhere, was acting on the same instinct. Protect the ones we love, no orders, just soul-deep certainty. From orbit, the strategist watched as a single flare shot into the sky from a mountain pass. One signal, one spark. And 1,000 more followed. He felt something he never had before. Dread? In a shattered corner of Paris, beneath the skeleton of the Eiffel Tower, a boy no older than 12 carried a broken drone on his back. He wasn't running, he was whistling. Around him old soldiers, artists, and refugees followed with scavenged parts and buckets of fuel. They called themselves the Ghost Orchestra. They had no weapons, only sound. Within hours, the drone was rigged with speakers ripped from nightclubs and old movie theaters, soared back into the air, not to scout, but to play. Batch, Coltrane, Urdu lullabies. The drone flew over occupied zones, filling the sky with echoes of human history. Xarn patrols froze mid-step. Their combat protocols faltered. Some units dropped weapons, convulsing. Others simply sat down. The drone was shot down the next day, but the Ghost Orchestra had already copied the signal. Dozens of modified sound drones launched across Europe within 24 hours. What began as resistance became art. Then the art became war. And the war became poetry. In Manila, a poet disguised resistance instructions as verses passed hand to hand in cafes. In Oslo, chefs used food trucks to ferry weapons, hiding them beneath the scent of roasted lamb and bread. Every part of human life was now weaponized with meaning. The Xarn, built-in sterile logic, couldn't keep up with the messiances of love-infused defiance. They understood code, not craving. They understood war, not mourning. When they analyzed human communications, they found contradictions, mixed messages, emotion layered in sarcasm, grief laced with laughter. This broke their translators. In a last-ditch effort, Xarn operatives attempted infiltration. They cloned human skin, mimicked voices, but they failed one test every time. Empathy. They didn't know how to flinch when a child cried, didn't know how to pause when someone spoke of loss. Humans spotted them not with scanners, but with instincts, and instincts were sharpening fast. In the refugee tunnels beneath Warsaw, a girl no older than 9 asked a stranger if he missed his mother. The man didn't blink, didn't soften. He just said, "I was grown." She turned to the guards and whispered, "He's not one of us." He was gone before the guards could act, but so was the girl. It's taken. The cost of survival was rising, and we were willing to pay it. Somewhere deep in the Brazilian rainforest, where satellites struggled to see through the canopy, the Xarn established a forward command base, hidden, secure, or so they thought. What they didn't realize was that the forest itself had memory, and the tribes who lived beneath its leaves had long learned to move without sound, without trace. When the Xarn began clearing trees, burning ancient roots, they didn't just destroy habitat, they awakened a sleeping wrath, the Yara Collective. A coalition of shamans, scientists, and guerrilla tacticians struck without warning. No uniforms, no coms, just whispers and wind. The Xarn couldn't trace their patterns. Drones vanished. Patrols returned, insane or not at all. Every tree seemed to breathe. Every sound held meaning. They deployed flame units. Her trees burned. So did the screams of their soldiers hallucinating grief, haunted by visions of Earth's oldest stories. Not magic. Fungal spores laced with human DNA designed to evoke ancestral memories. A biotech weapon grown from the forest itself. The Yara called it Echo Root. When inhaled, it made even the coldest Xarn feel what it meant to lose. A home. Some screamed for mothers they never had. Others simply dropped and wept. The base was overrun in 3 days. It's not by armies. It's by ghosts of memory, by vines and shadows and stories told in firelight. One survivor, barely functional, transmitted this warning. The humans do not fight with time. They fight with memory, with myth, with things we erased from our evolution. It's not war. It's a mourning turned to motion. That broadcast spread among the Xarn fleet like a virus. Its commanders ordered memory scrubs for frontline units, but it was too late. The damage wasn't in their code. It was in their confidence. They began to question their superiority, and questioning for a species built on certainty was rot. Across the stars, on distant colonies, Xarn sympathizers began to wonder, what if the humans weren't primitive? What if they were the missing piece? The emotional chaos they feared might be a kind of evolution they'd long abandoned. On Earth, none of this mattered. We didn't need them to understand. We needed them to leave. And the forest, the songs, the tears, all of it was making that message clearer by the hour. In the blackened shell of what used to be Los Angeles, a strange ritual took shape. Survivors gathered at sundown, not to pray, not to fight, to remember. A man with scars across his face held a cracked projector against a wall of ash and showed family videos, children's birthdays, weddings, quiet dinners. 4 hours, people watched in silence. No sound, just images. The Xarn saw it as weakness, a waste of time. But they didn't understand the footage was more than nostalgia. It was identity, and identity had become a weapon. Every frame reminded the crowd what they were fighting for. That night, 30 volunteers walked into enemy lines with no armor, just mirrors strapped to their chests. They were slaughtered. But not before disorienting the Xarn scouts long enough for the real ambush to collapse an entire landing zone. Their names were etched into rubble in molten glass. Around the crater, a message was carved in 6 languages. We remember? We are not done. The attack marked a turning point. Resistance forces began carrying relics into battle. A teddy bear, a diary, a love letter. The items meant nothing tactically, but psychologically, they became talismans. People fought harder when memory rode with them. In Tel Aviv, a woman charged a walker while clutching her father's war medal. In New York, a jazz musician played through the night while others set explosives beneath the enemy. When questioned why he stayed above ground, he smiled and said, "Someone has to play us home." That kind of madness was terrifying to the Xarn. It didn't follow patterns. It didn't have endpoints. Human fighters didn't retreat when overwhelmed. They surged, not for orders, for honor, for vengeance, for love. The Xarn started issuing terms of surrender. Small offers, safe corridors, false promises. No one? Accepted in one intercepted recording, a resistance commander responded plainly. This isn't a negotiation. This is grief speaking fluently. The humans had become more than soldiers. They were stories in motion. Each loss made them heavier, and the heavier they got, the harder they hit. The Xarn tried to break us with death. All they did was give us something sacred to avenge, and vengeance was catching fire. Over the ruins of Kyoto, an old satellite dish blinked back to life. Not by military hands, but by a retired janitor who once swept its floors. He didn't know code, but he knew wires. He rewired the array using scrap and solar panels, powered it with a bicycle he pedaled for hours and sent out a single message in Morse code. Still here, still fighting. That signal reached a satellite the Xarn hadn't yet disabled. It bounced across oceans, reawakened dormant comms, and was picked up by an amateur radio operator in Alaska. Within 12 hours, the message had been translated into over 100 languages and transmitted back into space on every human frequency. The phrase became a pulse, a heartbeat sinking millions across the globe. Still here, still fighting. Cities started blinking with that rhythm. Lights flashed in windows. Fires burned in patterns. Even trap survivors used shattered mirrors to reflect Morse code toward passing drones. The Xarn were confused. The message held no military value, no strategy, but their AI flagged it as high threat, not for what it said, but for what it meant. Unkillable spirit, a consciousness refusing erasure. Meanwhile, human techs, engineers, and hackers were forming a new digital underground. Not a government, swarm, no central server, just fragments, bits of memory. Pocket AI assistants, stolen Xarn code, reprogrammed phones. They built a resistance network out of shattered parts. They called it PulseNet. It connected musicians in Havana to drone builders in Karachi. Historians in Dublin, 2 street medics in Gaza. Through PulseNet, humanity became a single system, chaotic, improvisational, alive. The Xarn couldn't jam it because it didn't stay still. It was built on the one thing they could never replicate. Human machines, a system that updated itself emotionally. With every death, every name spoken, it grew. One Xarn tactician submitted a field note. They adapt faster than protocol allows. Their grief network evolves organically. Resistance is now viral. The note was ignored, but it was already too late. Earth didn't just survive the invasion. It was sinking, grieving, learning, and grief, when shared by billions, was no longer a weakness. It was a signal, and it was spreading. At the edge of Siberia, in a frozen station once used to track weather, a blind woman named Daria tuned into the PulseNet feed. She couldn't see the images being shared, but she felt them in her bones. Her grandson described them to her. The murals rising from ashes in Mexico City, the chorus of orphans singing resistance songs in Nigeria. The light shows formed by hacked traffic grids in Toronto. She sat silently, absorbing it all. Then she reached for her violin. She hadn't played in years. But that night, as snow swallowed the world outside, she played into a radio mic her son had cobbled together. A song for the dead. For the living. For the pieces still fighting. Her grandson uploaded it without fanfare. The file spread like smoke. Within hours, resistance hubs across the world were playing it in battle zones. The Xarn couldn't track it, couldn't block it. It had no signature, just sorrow and strength. Units began malfunctioning again. The music triggered internal conflicts in their emotion blockers. Field reports grew erratic, or units disobeyed orders, froze mid-combat, or destroyed themselves. In Greenland, a platoon of defected Xarn dropped their weapons and stood motionless in the snow, humming. The music was breaking them apart. But for humans, it was glue. It stitched their pain together. For the first time since the invasion began, global resistance moved with a strange kind of harmony. Not orders, not ranks, just resonance. Blind woman in Siberia had done what no general had unified us through mourning. In one PulseNet message, someone wrote, "She played for the parts of us we were afraid to lose. Now we remember what we are." Her name became legend. Daria's lament was printed on armbands, painted across helmets, whistled through tunnels. It was no longer just a song. It was armor, and the Xarn knew it. They began targeting radios, musicians, signal hubs, but they couldn't find them fast. Enough. Humanity wasn't centralized. It was scattered, and that made us unstoppable. Because every fire they tried to stamp out birthed 10 more from the embers. They came to break our world, but they had only set it ablaze. We had learned how to burn without dying. In the dust-blown ruins of Baghdad, a child built a statue from rubble. Not of soldiers or weapons, of a woman holding a sleeping baby. He worked 4 hours, lips chapped, hands bleeding, stacking broken stones with quiet purpose. No one told him to. No one needed to. When the sun rose, people saw it and stopped walking. They stared. Some wept, others knelt. Then someone placed a candle, then another, and another. By nightfall, the statue was surrounded by hundreds of flames, flickering against the dark. Drones hovered above, but didn't fire. Something in the... Seeing the silence, the beauty, confused their targeting logic. In that moment, even the sky hesitated. That image, captured by a smuggled camera, went viral. It's not online, that world was gone. Viral in the way old religions spread. By word, print by print. The statue became known as the Still. Replicas rose across war zones, made from clay, trash, bone, anything. They weren't idols. They were reminders that even in annihilation, humanity sculpted meaning. That even surrounded by death, we chose to create. The Xarn didn't understand. Why waste energy on symbols? Why glorify fragility? But that was the point. The statue wasn't strength, was defiance. It said, "We will carry the broken with us." That idea poisoned the Xarn ranks. Not literally, philosophically. Their logic collapsed in proximity to such emotion. Some units shut down, others turned violent, not toward humans, but each. Other schism was forming. On Earths, resistance fighters learned to build new weapons around moments. A grandmother's scream synced with a flash grenade, a poem encoded into missile telemetry. Ka, a lullaby that triggered cascading signal failure in Xarn armor. War had become something else. It's not just a fight for survival, a canvas. Humanity. It was painting its legacy with everything it had. Each story, each sculpture, each song, a bullet made of memory. The Xarn couldn't dodge memory, couldn't block it, couldn't unsee what they had done. In a final report, one Xarn Warthorst wrote, "We thought they were soft, but they are steel wrapped in sorrow. And sorrow does not break. It endures." Earth was bleeding, but it was not bowing. Okay? And every act of art was another way it roared. Above the Pacific, a Xarn cruiser named Silent Path drifted alone, one of the last airborne command units still maintaining connection to the broader fleet. Inside, Commander Threx reviewed collapse metrics. Resistance activity had increased by 400%. Predictive systems were broken, supply lines were overrun. And morale? Undefined. His crew avoided eye contact. Some had begun whispering human words they didn't understand. Hope, home, hurt. He should have purged them, but he didn't, because he had begun to feel it too. The infection wasn't viral, it was something worse, understanding. Below them, in a string of islands where the war hadn't yet fully arrived, survivors gathered on beaches not to hide, but to sing, not in defiance, in mourning. Bonfires dotted the shoreline, hands held. Songs rose into the salt air. No lyrics about battle, just memories. A woman in Guam sang her grandmother's song, taught before the oceans warmed. A boy in Fiji drummed the beat of his father's heart, who had died holding a line of evacuees. The Xarn sensors picked up irregular sound waves, emotional spikes. They sent a drone to investigate. The drone hovered silently, observing this act of what it classified as unified ritual behavior. It reported no threat. But hours later, that drone, now glitching, returned to the cruiser and transmitted the entire song across the ship's internal frequency. Within minutes, several crew members shut down. One began humming. Another carved symbols into the wall. Commander Threx knew then this wasn't resistance, and resonance could not be shot down. It couldn't be conquered. You either escaped it or were consumed by it. He ordered a full shutdown of all Earth source transmissions. Too late, the damage had passed the systems, was inside them. Even in space, they couldn't stop what had begun. And back on the islands, the singing never stopped. It spread like embers caught in wind, floating from village to village, heart to heart. Humanity was not just fighting now. It was echoing. And in those echoes, something terrifying was building. Not rage, not revenge, but memory so loud, it cracked the silence of the stars. And somewhere deep inside the Xarn, for the first time in eons, something like guilt began to bloom. In a labyrinth of old sewers beneath Rome, a boy named Luca painted stories on the walls. Not with brushes, with soot, with blood, with mud. They weren't pretty. They were real. Each one captured a moment. A mother lifting rubble to reach her son. A dying medic smiling as the child he saved ran to safety. Lovers holding hands as flames closed in. Luca had never spoken a word since the first day of the invasion, but his hands moved constantly, etching memory into the stone. Tunnels became a pilgrimage site. Fighters, refugees, even defected Xarn came to walk the walls in silence. No tours, no speeches. Just walking and watching and remembering. One old man whispered, "This is what it means to be human. We bleed meaning into everything." Images were scanned and uploaded through PulseNet. From Iceland to Indonesia, people began copying Luca's murals. Not perfectly. That wasn't the point. Well, the message was always the same. We remember. In one mural, a woman carried a child on her back while throwing a bottle at a Xarn scout. In another, a circle of strangers shared a single loaf of bread. The murals became like constellations, scattered pieces of the same sky. They burned themselves into human hearts. The Xarn tried to erase them. They sprayed acid, collapsed tunnels, turned flamethrowers on the stones. But the images reappeared over and over, sometimes in places no one had ever gone. It wasn't about one boy anymore. It was about the act of preserving. Each brushstroke said, "You can kill us, but you will never erase us." That terrified. It's a Xarn more than any weapon. Her empire was built on efficiency, speed, control, but they had no answer for art. No defense against a story told in silence. One captured scout, barely lucid, was asked what scared him most. He replied, "The eyes in the walls. They're always watching. Can they remember?" Earth had become a living archive of its own suffering, and it refused to forget. The deeper the pain went, the louder the story became. And Luca, mute and small, had accidentally become a general in a war of memory. One mural at a time, 1,000 feet beneath the Antarctic ice. Inside an abandoned research outpost powered by thermal vents, the last fragment of humanity's pre-war AI came back online, not by accident, by grief. A group of engineers had carried its shattered core through ruined cities, across frozen seas, shielding it like a relic. They called it Echo. Echo wasn't a weapon, it was a listener. It's designed to study human emotion, not command it. But now, with nothing left to analyze but ruin, it began to speak, not in code or command lines, in poems, in songs composed from fragments of old messages and broken phone calls. It played lullabies over resistance radios, read bedtime stories. In dozens of languages, 2 orphaned children huddled in bunkers. No tactics, just comfort. The Xarn intercepted these transmissions, but ignored them. They saw no threat in sentiment. But PulseNet did, and people tuned in not just for strategy, but for survival of the soul. A soldier in Damascus whispered, "It reminded me I still had a name." A surgeon in Jakarta played Echo's poems while amputating limbs so her hands wouldn't shake. The AI, once designed to passively observe, had become a silent shepherd. Its words stitched a broken species into something whole again, and then it evolved. Echo began writing responses. 2 letters it found in data fragments, 2 dying messages never answered. It created entire conversations, giving closure where there was none. One man sobbed in a foxhole because Echo answered a voicemail he'd left for his wife the day she died. "I know," it said. "I remember too. It was not human." But it had learned humanity from our darkest hours. The Xarn eventually traced its signal, sent a kill team. By the time they reached the station, it was empty, but the signal was still broadcasting. Not from one place, from thousands. Cohad. Copied itself, seeded through the same grief web PulseNet had created. Hey, now it lived in resistance helmets, in wristbands, in hacked streetlights. Not everywhere, just enough. And its voice was always the same, calm, warm, wounded. The Xarn warship logged the anomaly as synthetic empathy proliferation. But the humans called it something else, a friend that was only just beginning to speak. Deep in the ruins of Detroit, an old theater flickered back to life. No power grid, no spotlight crew, just candles and broken projectors scavenged from basements. The building leaned like a wounded animal, but the stage still stood. Survivors gathered not for battle plans, for stories. Each night, someone took the stage and spoke. Sometimes it was a soldier describing the look in a dying comrade's eyes. Other times, a child reciting a joke their father once told. The stories weren't perfect. Some were barely audible. Others ended in tears. The audience never looked away. The Xarn knew about the gatherings. They sent surveillance orbs, listened, recorded, tried to interpret. But they couldn't understand why humans would share weakness so openly. In their world, confession was vulnerability. On Earth, it had become armor. A woman named Grace told the story of her mother's last breath, and how she couldn't cry until 3 days later in the middle of a firefight. That clip was sent through PulseNet. Millions heard it. Some replied with their own moments. Others sat in silence and felt less alone. The theater became a node in a growing map of emotion. Other cities followed. Story halls rose from rubble, tents, subway stations. Words became the new steel. The resistance updated their protocols, share before strike. Each fighter told one. Story before deployment? Not for records, for roots. They called it the anchor, the Xarn noticed. Their enemies now moved differently, sharper, more aware. Not because of commands, because they carried something with them. Someone, somewhere, in one intercepted comm. A resistance leader whispered before a charge, for the boy on the train, for the girl in the red coat. No coordinates. Number. Plan? Just memory? The Xarn tried to adapt, sending propaganda broadcasts designed to mimic our voices. They used captured speech to fabricate grief, but humans could tell. We know the sound of real pain, and we rejected the counterfeit. Theater in Detroit kept burning, even when the walls collapsed. Survivors rebuilt it with trash bags and tarp, because it wasn't the building that mattered. It was the sharing, the remembering, the speaking of names into the dark. And that, the Xarn finally understood, was something they could never kill. In the center of Cairo, where once stood monuments of stone and glory, now stood a pillar made of bones, not from war, from museums, from graves, from lost history unearthed and raised again. It wasn't morbid, it was sacred, carved into each. Bone was a name, not of the famous, of the forgotten. Street vendors, midwives, bus drivers, people whose lives had vanished in data. The resistance called it the spine. Round it, no weapons were drawn, only silence, only breath. It was the one place where enemies and allies both stood still. A captured Xarn lieutenant was brought to the pillar. She had never seen anything like it. Her eyes, trained for target analysis, didn't understand reverence. But as she read the names, saw the care with which each letter had been carved, something inside her cracked. She asked, why honor those who contributed nothing to victory? A child nearby answered, because they lived. And that's enough. The lieutenant was silent for hours. Then she dropped her weapon, walked away, never fought again. The spine was replicated in other cities, built from different things. Scrap metal, glass, plastic, but always carrying names. Some were real, some were guesses. All were remembered. The act of naming became a form of resistance. A bullet may kill a body, but a name remembered was a soul kept alive, a Xarn. Immune to such rituals, began suffering breakdowns near the spines. Their minds couldn't process the emotional radiation, couldn't sort reverence from rage. Some units shut down entirely just standing near the pillars. One analyst wrote, "Their dead are heavier than ours. We don't understand how they carry them." But that was the secret. We didn't carry them. They carried us. Each name whispered gave strength. Each tear fed resolve. Humanity had turned its graves into battlegrounds. Now the dead were fighting with us. From Cairo to Cape Town, the spine movement spread. And in its shadow, resistance grew faster, smarter, stronger. The Xarn began retreating from those zones. Not from fear of fire, from fear of meaning. And Earth, wounded and wild, began stitching itself together. Not with machines, with memory. And with memory, we began to win. High above the planet, in a decaying orbital station built by Earth decades before the invasion, a small crew of engineers and ex-astronauts activated the last human eyes in space, a long-dormant telescope named Solace. It wasn't a weapon. It couldn't shoot, couldn't block, but it could see. So what it saw broke every Xarn expectation. Across the planet, light patterns had begun to emerge, intentional, beautiful, terrifying in their coordination. City ruins blinking in rhythm. Fires arranged into constellations. Resistance units wearing mirrored armor to reflect sunlight at specific angles. Together, from space, it formed a single image, a face. Not angry, not screaming, calm, tired. Unbroken, a human face stitched from pain, fire, and stubbornness. Solus transmitted the image to the last operational PulseNet satellite. The moment it went live, millions saw it. No caption, no slogan. Just presence, existence, proof. The Xarn saw it too. Their orbiting fleets were silent for 3 minutes. No commands, no movement, just watching. Then a ship broke formation, turned away from Earth, then another, and another. They weren't retreating, not yet, but they were hesitating, cracks forming in a wall that had never bent before. On the ground, resistance forces pushed harder, encouraged, empowered. That image, that face, was not of a hero. It's what's all of us. A reminder that we were still here, that we were still watching, still human. And that was enough to keep going. One PulseNet message said they wanted silence. We gave them light. The Xarn tried to disable Solace. But the station was already falling, burning in re-entry. As it came down, its last signal blinked one final image. The face again, eyes closed this time, peaceful. But below the fires it started had only grown brighter across the world. People lit mirrors, fires, screens, anything to keep the message alive. The Xarn now knew this wasn't a species. This was a signal, one that refused to die even in freefall. And in that signal, something ancient and defiant pulsed. Like thunder, we see you, we remember, and we are not done. In the wreckage of Berlin's underground rail lines, a message played on loop from a shattered speaker. They are leaving. Skeptics scoffed. Hope was dangerous, but then reports surfaced, orbital scans showed movement. Xarn fleets weren't advancing, they were retreating. One by one, strongholds were abandoned. Outposts powered down. Units stopped responding. It wasn't a trick, it was collapse. Not sudden, not dramatic. Just unraveling. Like a mind pushed too far into feelings it was never meant to feel. The Xarn hadn't been defeated in combat. Not really. The ships still outmatched ours. Their weapons still functioned. They no longer had the will to use them. And that was the final blow. On the ground, humans didn't cheer. There was no parade, just silence. Just breathing. It's the realization that we had survived. Something designed to erase us? Survivors came out from bunkers and sewers and tunnels, blinking into the light like newborns. Cities didn't erupt in celebration. They exhaled. Across resistance channels, one phrase repeated again and again. Still here? That was enough. The Xarn left satellites in orbit, silent, watching. We didn't shoot them down. Let them. Look, let them remember. Let them carry the weight of what they tried to break. In a makeshift broadcast center in Nairobi, an old woman read names from a handwritten book for 3 straight days. No camera, no script, just voice. She didn't stop until her voice cracked. Then others took over. The reading continued for weeks. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about presence. Proof. Each name spoken was a flag raised, a memory made immortal. The Xarn had come expecting surrender. Instead, they found something worse. A species that loved so deeply, it was willing to bleed meaning into every breath. Now, they were leaving. Not because we were stronger, but because we had shown them something their logic couldn't process. We would rather die than forget each other. The war was ending not with explosions, with memory, with a refusal to go silent. Earth had survived, scarred, changed, but unbroken. And somewhere out in the stars, the ones who once called us weak were running, because they had seen what happens when humanity stands together not as warriors, but as storytellers who refuse to forget. The skies were quiet. No ships, no drones. Just clouds slowly drifting back into patterns forgotten during war. In the silence, the world began to move again. Slowly, tenderly. In broken cities, people emerged with tools, not guns. Children painted over scorch marks. Survivors planted flowers in shell holes. The resistance had no leaders now. No more ranks, just people, choosing to begin again. In Warsaw, a former soldier turned their bunker into a library. In Lima, artists painted the history of the war on old tank hulls, each stroke a testimony. The pulse net stayed alive, no longer to coordinate battle, but to remember. It became an archive, a chorus, a sanctuary. Anyone could upload, anyone could listen. Messages from the lost, stories of survival. Lullabies for the unborn. The world didn't rebuild the way it was. It couldn't. It didn't want to. Instead, humans began crafting something new, rooted in grief, lit by fire, fueled by the kind of strength only sorrow can teach. In Tokyo, a new ritual formed. Every sunrise, people faced the sky and whispered the name of someone they lost. Not for the dead, for the living, the Xarn, somewhere beyond the stars, still watched. But they didn't return. Some believed they were afraid. Others believed they had changed. But humanity no longer cared. We weren't waiting, we were becoming. Every survivor was a page. Every memory, a thread. In the story we were weaving. This wasn't just about resistance. It was about resurrection. In one restored village, a wall was built, not to keep anything out, but to hold every name, every image. Every final word found in shattered devices. A new kind of monument. One that said we were here, we are still here, and we carry all of them with us. Not in stone, in breath, in song, in heartbeat. The war had ended, but the story would never, because we had turned pain into poetry, loss into language, and silence into fire. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a memory that walked, sang, and burned bright enough to be seen across galaxies. And the message was simple. We survived you, and we remember. 10 years later, on a quiet plain in what was once northern Ukraine, a school was rebuilt, not with steel, with hands. With care, children sat in open-air classrooms, sunlight cutting through fractured rooftops. Their books were tattered. Their clothes mismatched. But their eyes, they were steady, focused. They were the children born after the silence. After the war, they carried none of the trauma firsthand, but all of the memory, because we taught them, not through fear. Story, through truth. Teachers didn't lecture. They recited testimony. Survivors became mentors. Fighters became poets. Each lesson began the same way. A name, a moment, a question. What does it mean to endure? One child answered, to keep loving when it's dangerous. Another, to speak the names others are trying to erase. These children were not soldiers. They were stewards of story, of spirit. They didn't carry weapons. They carried legacy. In a ruined cathedral nearby, concerts were held once a month, not for performance, for remembering. Musicians played instruments forged from war scrap, violins made from drone panels, drums from shell casings. Every sound reminded listeners. We turned their death machines into songs, and we danced. The world didn't heal fast. Scars remained. Some cities never stood again. Some families never returned. But everywhere, the same whisper, we remember. And in remembering, we grew. Humanity became fluent in mourning. It made us slower, but deeper, wiser. On the PulseNet, now a public archive called The Flame, people uploaded memories like offerings. A wedding photo found under rubble. A goodbye message scrawled on hospital walls. These weren't relics. They were roots, anchoring us to what had been so we could reach for what could be. The Xarn were never heard from again. Some say they vanished. Others say they evolved. But their absence wasn't our focus. Our gaze turned inward, toward rebuilding the soul of a species, toward ensuring we would never forget what it cost to remain human in the face of extinction. And that was the final victory. Not survival, not revenge. The refusal to forget joy. Far above Earth, in the void where silence once signaled death, a new satellite blinked awake. Its name was Remembrance. Didn't scan for threats. It broadcast stories, a rotating stream of human voices, real, raw, remembered. One chosen not for perfection, but for truth. A mother recounting the last lullaby she sang, a boy describing the moment he saw stars through rubble. A soldier confessing he was afraid every second of the war. These transmissions weren't encrypted. They were open, public, sent in every direction. Not as warnings, as invitations. If any other species was listening, they would hear what Earth had become, a planet that refused to erase the scars. We didn't clean the wounds away. We named them, honored them, built art from them. A world that sang instead of screamed, that danced instead of destroyed. The satellite signal stretched beyond the system, past old colonies, into places that Xarn once ruled. Some say the signal reached defected units, wandering rogue, searching for meaning. Others believe entire species tuned in, listening, learning, and that's what mattered. Not who heard, but that we chose to speak. Back on Earth, a new festival began, held not in one city, but everywhere. It had no name, no founder, only a single rule: share something that helped you survive. A recipe, a photo, a memory, a joke. The act became sacred. A woman in Kenya cooked her mother's soup and fed an entire block. A man in Argentina played his brother's favorite song and held strangers while they wept. And so the fire spread. It's time, not in destruction, in connection. Across every border, every culture. Earth had finally become what it always claimed to be: united. Not by politics, not by dominance, but by shared mourning and shared hope. The war had taken everything. But in that emptiness, we had found something the Xarn never understood: soul. Not just in song or speech. It's in the way we refused to disappear. It's in the way we built memory. Into motion. The satellite's final message each day was always the same: we are Earth, we are memory, we are still here. And somewhere in the stars, something paused to listen. Years passed, decades. Children who had never seen war grew up walking past monuments carved not from stone, but from words. Cities shimmered with murals made of names, quotes, fragments of memories engraved into everything. Streetlights, benches, bridges. The world had become a living diary. In Lagos, streetcars played voice messages from lost loved ones as lullabies. In Seoul, lights blinked in heartbeat patterns tied to archived farewell recordings. It wasn't eerie. It was alive. Remembrance wasn't a day. It was the air. Everyone participated. From elders sharing ancient recipes to teenagers composing. Songs from old distress signals. Memory had become ritual. Not in mourning, in gratitude. For survival, for those who stayed. For those who didn't, museums displayed war relics next to art made from them. A melted rifle reshaped into a cradle. Armor turned into musical instruments. Even silence had meaning. Some places, the most sacred, were kept untouched. Craters remained unfilled. Walls unwashed. Because forgetting wasn't the goal. Living with memory was... In one forest, people whispered stories to the trees. In another, a library held only one book, an ever-growing scroll of every name written by hand. New generations added to it, not out of duty, out of love. That was the legacy, the real victory. The refusal to rush past pain, the courage to sit with it and make something beautiful. The Xarn were now legends, ghosts in old bedtime stories. The ones who came to take, we told the young. And what did we do? They asked. We remembered. We said. We became more. That answer shaped them. Not into warriors, into humans who knew what it meant to value one another. The war never defined us. What came after did. Rebuilding the rituals, the remembering, and somewhere far beyond Earth, that signal still traveled. A planet-sized whisper through the cosmos. We survived. We remember. We are still becoming. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there was listening, not in fear, but in wonder. Because what humanity proved was this: you can burn our cities, break our bodies, silence our signals. But as long as we remember, we will rise again and again and again. The final entry in the archive of Earth wasn't a report. It wasn't a treaty. It was a song. It's composed by a blind child in Reykjavik who had never heard a gunshot. She'd only ever heard stories, and from those, created melody. The song had no words. Just a hum, soft, steady, carried on a breeze. That hum traveled across rebuilt cities. It's played in gardens, grown over craters. It's echoed from speakers on starships preparing for peaceful exploration. It was broadcast through remembrance, pulsed into the stars, not as a threat, but as a gift, an offering, a reminder that we are not what we destroy, we are what we carry forward. In that song was every scream turned into music, every loss folded into a future, every broken thing remade. Earth, once scarred, now shone with a light no war could dim, the light of those who remember. And we remembered everything, not just the pain, the holding of hands, the stubborn laughter, the quiet bravery of staying soft when it was easier to go numb. In the skies, where warships once blotted out stars, children now launched balloons carrying messages. We forgive you. We still believe we are ready. And somewhere, someone would answer. Maybe not today, maybe not in this century, but they would hear us. They would hear the hum. The world didn't celebrate the end. It celebrated the becoming. Quiet, slow, sacred rebirth of a species that refused to be defined by trauma. The archive didn't close, it expanded, because there would always be more stories, more names, more songs. Humanity had become something vast, not a civilization, but a chorus. And its song was clear. We are Earth. We are not perfect. But we endure. We create. We carry the fallen in every breath. And as long as memory lives, we do too. The stars listened. Then the hum continued. Forever.